this is about the store, and at Christmas time, they had these tin tubs, and they had them in front of the meat box, and they'd put candy and nuts and all the Christmas goodies in front of there, and that's where you filled you up a sack of whatever you wanted.
Free of charge?
Well, no, I'm sure you had. They probably gave big families a sack of some kind of fruit, nuts, and whatever for Christmas. It's just a little something.
About what year was that?
What?
What year? When do you remember? How old
Oh,
were
it's
you
back
when
in
you
the
remember?
30s.
Yeah. Things were different then.
Oh, yeah.
A lot different back
And
in the 30s.
anyway, that was something about the store, and it had an elevator. It had 2 floors, and it had furniture up on the 2nd floor, and we thought it was really fun to get on that elevator and ride up to the 2nd floor. Of course, it wasn't closed in. It was just a wood platform, and they punched a button, and you went up, and you punched one and come down. So
Now, was that in what the original hardware store?
it was at the back of the store.
Was it both of, they were combined at that time?
Yeah, they were.
Grocery and hardware
Really?
and clothing and
Nails, you name it, they had everything.
Everything.
So,
well, at the beginning it was J.W. Brown and Sons.
okay.
In about 1888, I remember the date on one of the pictures or
Letterhead.
letterhead.
Thing? Yeah.
1888, I believe, is when it was
It's when they started that.
Mhm.
Your granddaddy was J.W.
correct.
Brown, and he lived directly across the street from the store in a
Right.
2-story white house. I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And so did he open up originally the hardware store, or was the hardware store, grocery store, and clothing all at the same time?
It was all together at
All
at the
same
beginning.
time, as far as I.
Mhm.
And they said when they started off, they just was going to be undertaking too, and they said they did one body, and they decided they didn't want to do that.
Well, I wonder why. When did they move? When did your mom and dad move? They put I remember it as the Bibb-White store, and it was next door. When did they move the grocery store from the hardware store? Do you remember? Or was that always there when?
No, the grocery store was over. It was a building over on the railroad track that they by the railroad track, and they hold walnuts there. They had this where they cracked out walnuts,
Yeah.
and these women, well, the men, I guess they had these. I don't know exactly how they made it. I'm sure out of a railroad, a rail, and they cracked the walnuts, the men, and they brought them around to these tables, and these women picked the walnuts out, and they put them in trays, and they sold them. I don't know the name of the candy company, but they sold them to a candy company in Nashville.
Really?
Were there a lot of people that had walnut trees around here at the time?
Well, they must have been, and they bought them from several people too around. They'd bring in a load of walnuts, and they had to hull them and cure them out because they were green. They would have to do that. So
So the building that they hauled the walnuts in next to the railroad track, they moved it next to
over
the
there,
hardware
that was
store.
the grocery store.
Yeah. So they moved that building up on the north side of the hardware store. What year was that? Do you know?
I think
Can you
it'd be in the
remember?
late 1940s.
Or the early, well, now, let's see. Vicky was born in 50, so I don't know if it was before I know she was little, and there used to be a pole out there in front of the store, the grocery store, and she would climb that pole when she was about 4 or 5 years old and slide down.
Did your mom and dad do the grocery store part? When did they take the grocery store part?
Well, that was around that time, I suppose, don't you?
Probably at late 40s or early
Yeah.
50s.
I remember it, the Bibb-White store.
Yeah?
And we would go down there, and your mom and dad, I remember Uncle Dallas Martin worked down there.
You sure did.
Yeah.
Mr.
He did the
Mason.
meat, didn't he?
What's
He
that?
did the meat. Wasn't he in the meat counter? Did he do that, or was that your dad? Who took
Daddy
care of
usually did the meat, and I don't know who helped him. But now the hams, they had the country hams too.
Tell us about
And her
that.
dad
Yeah.
did that. And
Right.
took care of the checking of the curing of the hams and the firing of was it sawdust that they
Sawdust.
used to smoke sausage and hams, and they had a directory and they shipped it out all over everywhere. People come by to get ham and sausage, and as far as they probably did bacon too, don't you think?
They did bacon.
Was it a branded kind of a thing? Did they have a name brand that they were shipping out, or was it just?
Brown's
No, it was
Country
just
Ham.
there.
It was just called Brown's Country Hams.
I know there was a big sign as you go into Cheatham County. It was advertising Brown's Country Hams, and on the bottom or the side somewhere it said, "Every pig's ambition is to be a Brown's Country Ham."
I remember them. There were several around, and they had metal ones that were made too.
Yeah.
They weren't as big, but I remember seeing those.
But now Garner, he mostly took, I think, care of we called it the ham house.
They did.
And took care of the shipping, and they'd take a truckload I don't know if they carried them to the post office at White Bluff or Dickson or where they'd carry a truckload to be shipped out every so often.
When did they quit doing that? Do you remember? About what year?
No, I don't.
I remember them doing that, but I can't remember them when they quit
They
smoking.
stopped.
Mm-hmm.
Probably my dad passed away in 71, which is, his name's was Garner Brown, and Betty's father was Howard Brown, which they were brothers. And when my dad passed away in 71, so I would think possibly in the maybe mid-60s, because my dad got sick and he was the one that cured the hams. And my brother Jimmy did a lot of the shipping and wrapping. But I would guess mid-60s, wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't remember my brother ever curing them. It's my dad, I remember as a little girl going in the ham house with him, and there was just a long, like a paved concrete slab, and then the hams were on each side in vats of salt. And then in the other part was where the sawdust was. See, I suppose they cured them first, and then they would take them in and let them smoke, and that would cure them. And then they'd be ready. And I know sometimes they had hams as old as 2 years. People thought the older the ham, the better they were.
Mm-hmm.
But as a child, eating one that was 2 years old, I didn't think it was the best thing in the world. But and a lot of people would give those. I think Betty talked about they give those hams as gifts, and they were they weighed quite a bit, and that was a very nice gift. But when the people received them, the hams had mold on them. At 2 years old, especially, they would have mold on them, which it was a good mold. It didn't, it wouldn't harm you physically. And a lot of people would say they threw them away because they had mold on them.
They weren't from the country.
Or
No.
they would send them back, they'd say they were spoiled.
Right.
And you know, that's the only kind of ham I think that we got to eat was the ones that the people sent back that wasn't good. They
Yeah,
said it wasn't
probably
good.
wasn't.
And they were really the best, I guess.
Well, yeah, there were a lot of good ones.
Mm-hmm.
I remember your mother, she cooked, one of the things that she cooked frequently for a lot of people and for lunches and dinners, it wasn't a country ham, but she would do a regular ham. And when I was little, she would put pineapple and some kind of seasoning on that, and we had that spices. Yeah, it was great.
And the
She was a
country
good
ham.
cook.
Yes, she was. I can still smell her kitchen today.
Yeah,
It always smelled so good.
yeah, she was a great cook.
But now I remember my mother cooking the country hams, and I'm sure your mother did too. She would take the skin off
Yeah.
and score the fat. And then she would stuff it with cloves and brown sugar and bake it that way, which
We need some right now.
we do.
Yes, we do.
Okay,
Oh,
Timothy.
Lottie.
Tell me what else is on your paper here.
Oh, me. Well, I know the store, back then, people broke in. And
Yeah.
they, you know, at different times, and they'd steal stuff out of the store, so it got to be pretty regular. So they had a burglar alarm put in the store, and it was, the bell was, whatever the alarm was connected to our house. And of course, it'd be late at night or, you know, some wee hours of the morning or something, and that bell would go off, and they'd get up and go to the store to see who broke in. And of course, they'd always head to the railroad tracks and go down, you know, but they have even had bloodhounds out to catch the people that were breaking in.
Really?
When I was growing up, they'd have them bloodhounds going up and down the railroad to see if they could.
Did they have policemen back then?
Oh, yeah.
You remember any of them?
Yes, I do.
Who were they?
Louis Donnelly was one of them. And you know, people, they didn't, well, of course, breaking in, stealing, I guess they did that. But people never did anything really bad. They got drunk, maybe on a Friday night or something. But as far as shooting and killing, that was very rare. That didn't happen much. And they had the jailhouse, the telephone office, it was the store, the telephone office, and the jailhouse, which we call the booby hatch. Is what we call the jailhouse. And they'd lock them up on Friday and Saturday night, and my aunt was a night telephone operator.
What was her name?
Beulah.
Yeah.
Beulah Graham. And they would holler for her to come and get them out of jail. Get somebody to come get them out of jail. Of course, she couldn't do it. And one night, this guy, I guess he was drunk, but anyway, he kept calling for somebody to come get him, and they didn't do it. So what they done, I don't know how many was in there at that time, they set it on fire. They set the jail on fire and burned it down.
Well, I hope they got out of the jail
They
before
did.
it burned up.
Yeah, but they burned it down.
They must have had cigarettes, some kind of
The
matches.
matches, they probably didn't check them, they just threw them in there. But Louis Donnelly, back to him, he was one of the policemen there in town. And he wore this belt with his, his pistol and his blackjack on his belt. And I have seen him hit them in the head on the street till they fell with the blackjack.
Oh,
Now, they couldn't, I don't believe they could get by with that now.
Well, we didn't have a lot of crime in White
Well,
Bluff,
like I
so to
say, it wasn't anything much except they were drinking or drunk when they got their check on Friday. They might have got drunk, but as far as somebody killing somebody, kidnapping somebody, or, that didn't happen.
Didn't have to worry too much.
No. That was the good times.
of course, we did have the reputation that we had Ku Klux Klans. I'd heard that, and that we were White Bluff because there was.
Oh, I know about the
That
Ku
was
Klux
true.
Klan.
It was true, huh?
Yeah, 'cause we were, what it was is this Miss Mag Wolf. She was a white woman, and she was an elderly lady, and she had this black girl that helped her, and she got married, and they had a little girl. Well, the Miss Mag, she kept getting worse, and she had to have somebody stay with her all the time. So they moved in with her. And we lived 2 houses down the street from them. Miss Mag lived up on the corner, kind of where the Whippersnappers,
Yeah.
whatever the Mexican restaurant is.
Yeah.
And we had to go by their house to go to school every morning. We went one morning, and they had burnt a cross in front of that house overnight. Talk about kids being scared. We got out in the middle of the road. Of course, it wasn't still burning, but I knew
You could see
that
where it was.
The
Yeah.
road was still dirt at that time, was
probably so. But they were good people, the black people. They didn't bother anybody in White Bluff. I don't know where they went, if they went to somebody's house or what, but they'd come in on Saturday night, and they'd been somewhere, and they'd be hooping and hollering and cutting up, and all of them had taps on their shoes, and there'd be a dancing, and we'd just try to stay awake on Saturday night and lay up in the windows so we could hear what they were doing, what they said coming in. But as far as them ever hurting anybody or being out of place or wanting to be, well, I played with them. I ate a lot of blackberry pie at their house, and they were black and I was white, and that was it.
And your parents didn't tell you any different, did they? But we had a lady, I can remember that my parents called her Colored Nora, who did the washing and ironing for a lot of the white folks around White Bluff, and I don't know where they got their water or their
I don't know
electricity.
either. I don't think they had electricity. I think they ironed. I know Nora did for Mother, and they had these black, what they call smoothing irons that they heated by the fireplace.
And they set them on top
Of
of
the
the stove
Uh-huh.
too, didn't they?
Yeah, but I don't know where they got their water.
I don't
They
either.
had to have water from somewhere.
Well, yeah, and it was.
Where did Nora live? Do you remember?
Over across the railroad, there was about 7 or 8 houses over there, and there was blacks that lived in all of those.
And it was called Colored Row, or I don't know if I can say the word.
No,
I can't
that's
say the, but anyway.
they'll get you now.
That's what they called it, though. And I mean, we didn't think anything about it. We didn't think anything about their color, their race. I mean, they were just
people like us.
The last two I remember growing up, always being there, was Boots and Mamie.
Yeah.
Those were the only two black people I ever knew growing up in White Bluff. And Boots was good friends. Emmett C.
Yeah.
at the new store. And I remember him, and I remember Mamie. She cleaned houses, and she washed clothes and did a lot of those things, and everybody loved them.
She worked for the Langfords, didn't she?
maybe, I know there was a house right beside of the Langfords that the black people
Before
lived in.
they moved on Turnbull Road.
They lived in that house beside of the Langfords. It was a little house
I
there.
think, well, I don't know if that's where they live, but I think she helped Miss Langford with the kids, you know, when they were little and everything.
Tell me about what you remember about the old park across the railroad track from the hardware store. Wasn't that called Highland Park? Isn't that what they called it?
I know people came out from Nashville in the summertime, I guess, to get their families out and get away from the city. And I know I don't know how it started, but I know they kind of all went together and they built a swimming pool and they had their own water system, and each one, I guess, built their own house or whatever according to the way they wanted it or liked it. And they were from prominent families in Nashville. And I know some of them would drive their cars, you know, back and forth to Nashville, and some of them rode the train, would ride the train. And in the summertime, all the city friends, I guess, children or something, they'd come. It'd be a whole train load, it looked like, that would get off there and go over there, and they'd have different things for them to do. So, and I know one of them was Bill Ward Publishing, Baird Ward Publishing Company, and he had I don't know what kind of car it was during the war, some kind of, and he had it rigged up, excuse me, where it would burn kerosene, so he could drive it back and forth to Nashville, you know. So anyway, that was a plus for the White Bluff, I guess, to have something that nice there.
That went on several years.
Oh, yeah.
Long time.
So I don't know. I know there's one or two original buildings still there that these people owned and everything.
They were like mountain cabins almost, something you would see in Switzerland.
Yeah,
or
that one
Appalachia.
right there on the road is.
Is that the one Paul Howell lived in?
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Now, I'm sure it's still
probably.
good shape and livable. I don't know
there's
who
several
bought it.
still, I think there may be 3 left out of the
Original.
I think that's right. And there was a spring down under the hill. What was the name of that spring?
I don't have.
It gave out
Not the
Sulfur
Sulfur
Well.
Yeah, Sulfur Well.
Yeah.
I thought you meant at the park.
No, down at the bottom of the hill where you turn off to go to the park. Yeah, and I remember when I was little, a lot of people would go down there and get water. They thought that was very healthy.
It was, and there was a nice creek that went by.
Oh yeah. I think it's kind of private down there now, because I think the people that lived down there was too much party stuff going on, and they had to put up no trespassing. But yeah, we used to go to Sulfur Water all the
Oh, we
time.
did. I remember Bettye.
Take a picnic lunch.
Yeah,
and
we'd go down there and find periwinkles and have picnics down there.
wade the creek.
I
Yeah.
remember as small, one time we took washcloth and soap. We took a little bath in the creek just for the fun of it. Or maybe I needed it, I don't know.
It's been years since I've been down there, but I'm sure it comes.
It was close to everything. And,
But they were drilling for oil, they said, when they struck that,
That water.
yeah, that stream of sulfur water.
they drilled for oil several places around
Yeah.
town, numerous times. And that was one of the places they drilled. Do you remember when they were doing that? Is that before?
That's before my time, Timothy.
Okay.
Where were,
I don't know how much.
I
where were
remember
some of the other places?
on
they drilled?
Leatherwood.
Oh,
They
really?
drilled down there, but there were several places. I remember my dad talking about them drilling for oil. They thought there was oil here. A lot of water, but no oil. So, what else do you have down there, Betty?
Well, I remember this lady, her name was Miss Lula Howell, and she lived up there in a house beside Myatt's store, and she couldn't hear, and she had what they called a trumpet back then, and it was just a round thing. It had a little tube, and she stuck it up to her ear. We thought that was grand to see Miss Lula here with her trumpet.
How old was Miss Lula? She was quite an old lady, wasn't she?
Oh, she was then, yeah.
Yeah.
We had there was an apple tree, of course, and the kids back behind that, what we call the mill shed at the store where they kept the feed and,
right.
and everything. And as quick as the apples would get so big, every kid in town was there with a salt shaker. If the apple ever got ripe on that tree, I never knew when it was. Because those kids, and I was one of them, to get an apple off of the tree. And in back of the store, it had a hitching post because people came with their wagons and the kids on the weekends and the quilts on the wagons, and they'd come and spend the day in White Bluff, and they'd make the, go all over town, shop at all the different stores and get them some cheese and bologna and crackers, and they'd
That's what
eat.
they did.
Yeah, that was a treat.
Well,
Do you remember
yeah,
any
it was fun.
restaurants in town growing up?
Was there a restaurant?
Yeah, were there restaurants anywhere? You remember?
The Star, Red Star.
Well, the Red Star had been there for a while, and then Walter Jones had one in the James building before it burned,
Really?
and you could get something there. And I don't know about Baker's Inn.
That was a nice restaurant.
Do you remember when Baker's Inn opened?
It was back in the Depression days, I know.
Did they build the lodge there then? Was that built during the Depression as well? Or was that already there?
I remember it as long as.
It'd been there
long
for a
time.
long time. I don't know.
It was before the Depression then
Yeah.
because,
Back in the 20s, maybe.
yeah.
And on Highway 70 went through
Yeah.
when they had a place, people had a place to stay.
That was the main road.
Broadway of America.
That was
That's
the,
what they
what
called
the
it.
interstate is today. Went
Right.
right through the middle of town. I remember Grandy telling me about down below Adelaide, your mom and dad's, at the underpass, that they would go down and put wood, long planks,
under the underpass because it would get so muddy, people could not get through. They would get stuck there and they couldn't get to town or from town. And they would go down there because it affected their business so much. And they would go down there and do that. He remembers when that was pretty much a dirt road, what's Burns to White Bluff now. Do you remember that being a dirt road, or was it always paved?
As far as I remember, it was always paved, the
Yeah,
Burns
I think
Road.
so.
But it seemed like, was White Bluff paved how long ago?
No, not all the
Not all
streets,
the time.
because I know ours was a dirt street, and in the summertime, the dirt, and they got used oil from the garages and sprayed it on the
The road.
street, the road, to keep the dust down in the summertime.
They weren't too much worried about the EPA, were they?
Or nothing else, I don't guess.
Spray
But
it down.
anyway.
Did it? Well, the only paved road in town was pretty much in front of your mom and dad's, in front of, and then the road that's out here, what's the old Charlotte Road now, and 70, because most of your side roads were all dirt.
Yeah,
Yeah, gravel.
down uptown White Bluff
Yeah.
was dirt. I remember when it was on a Sunday afternoon, and we had this big old radio that sat on the floor, and it came on that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. And I remember the troop trains, they'd go through town, and then the convoys we were right in the middle of both. The convoys were up on the dirt road, and then the troop train. And of course, I was right at the age where I thought, well, we'll just write to some of these boys, and they'd throw their names and their address off, and of course, we'd go out and pick them up. And I wrote to a lot of, well, one of them came to visit after the war, so,
What did your mom and dad have to say about that?
well, she cooked a big meal for him.
That's great.
Well, no, they didn't mind us writing to them.
Growing up, what did you do for fun?
I went to all the square dances I could go to. And we went to things at school, that we had plays, and they had carnivals like at Halloween, and of course I played basketball, and I went roller skating. I liked to skate. We used to get to go to the Hippodrome in Nashville, where Leon Cole played the organ. Of course, Mother loved music, and that was a good excuse for her to get to go. They liked to go listen to him play the music and the skate. Of course, I wasn't a fancy skater. I was just a skater. I didn't do the forward and backward and the waltz and all that on the
Just
skate.
stayed
I
on your
just
feet.
skated.
You had
Yeah.
a good time.
Yeah.
What else did you do? Do you remember
Well-
growing up when you were little?
Well, and we went swimming a lot. We went camping with Maud and James. We had that camp down on the river,
Where on the river? Was it Harpeth River?
Harpeth River, down below the Narrows.
It was around Leatherwood, wasn't it? Didn't they
Yeah,
have a
you
camp
had to
down
go
there?
through Leatherwood, but this was on the river, down below Camp Boxville, where the Boy Scout camp was.
Go up there?
No, we didn't go up there. They came down to
Where you were?
But anyway, we learned to swim down there. They had an old boat down there, and James and Daddy had these fish baskets where they baited them with Limburger, I think it was Limburger
Probably.
cheese back then, and they'd catch these big fish, and they had a boat they kept down there and kept it locked and tied, and they'd get us kids out in the river and they'd turn the boat over, just turn it upside down. They said, "You're gonna learn how to swim."
Who did that to you?
Well, Maud and James and Mother and Daddy. And they said, "Okay, you either learn to swim or you hang on to this boat all evening." So
you
we
learned to
learned to swim in Harper the River because they would turn the boat over and said, "Okay."
How old were you then?
Well, probably about 10, 9, 10, something like that.
You and Anita and Hartwell were all about the same age, weren't you?
Now,
Hartwell's older, wasn't he?
He was 5 years older than I am. But we used to go, they used to take us to Centennial every summer. And of course, Hartwell, he was impressing these girls up there, doing his stuff. And he would go dive under the water and get us by the feet and pull us under. Oh, I got so mad at him. I get him by the hair of the head. Don't do that anymore. We'd get to talking, and all of a sudden, he'd have you by the feet and pulling you under.
But you took care of that, didn't you? They had a camp or something where they fished a lot out close to Bettye, Sears Lake. Do you remember that?
Well, there was now that was private, I think. It wasn't, he probably let people. I know I went with Uncle Garner one time. He took me fishing, and we went to Sears Lake. So I rigged me up a fishing pole, and I don't know what I had on it for bait. But anyway, I think that day I caught more than they did.
I have pictures made at Sears Lake. Either your mom and dad, my mom and dad made. You all were probably 10, 12 years old, and there's numerous times that they were made. So did you go down there very much?
Well, I guess we did because it was close by.
Yeah.
Now, he was Mr. Messier, he was German, wasn't he?
I don't know.
I think he was, because he did plumbing too. I know one time we had some plumbing done, and it was in the summertime, and he was kind of a big man, had a big tummy, and he had real blonde curly hair, and he had to get up under the house to see about something. And he, of course, he had perspired, and he was all wet and muddy, and when he came out from under the house. But I think he was German.
I think Grandy had him do work. Was he a stonemason as well? Did he do that?
He probably did something else, but I don't really know about that.
I was wondering. Tell me about school. What do you all remember about that?
School. Go ahead.
Well, I remember Miss Thomas was my first grade teacher, and if you did anything bad, we were spanked on the hand with a paddle, sort of like a ruler, Well, it hurt a little bit, but and I can always remember in her class that people who were really bad got to go back to the cloakroom, so I would every now and then try to be real bad so I could go back to the cloakroom. It was more fun back there.
Yeah.
But as far as having fun, what did we do? I know we had the best cooks in the world. Yeah. They cooked real food, and we ate it too. We didn't have pizza.
Who were the teachers?
We didn't know what it was.
I remember Miss Thomas, of course. I remember Miss Sadie Bibb. Yeah. I was second grade teacher. Miss Jewel Larkins was my third grade teacher, and I remember her. If I remember anything, I remember her teaching us the 23rd Psalm.
Miss Jewel.
Miss Jewel. I don't remember about learning too much. I really wasn't a very good student, but I did make it through the 12th grade okay. Remember Miss Catherine Nichols and Miss Annis and Miss Joy Martin. There was another little lady, Miss Sin Sing, that always, the poor thing she probably didn't weigh 90 pounds. And she was so afraid of germs, she kept a bottle of alcohol on the desk. And every time a child would go up, she just kept wiping her. She would wipe her desk off continuously, you know. But, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. I had my sister-in-law as a 4th grade teacher, Colleen Brown. I think that was her first year when she got out of college. She was my teacher, but she wasn't my sister-in-law at the time, but I just thought that was sort of ironic later on.
Everybody
she married my
loved her.
brother.
Oh, yeah.
She was a great teacher.
Yeah.
Very easygoing. Everybody learned from her. But she had discipline, but she didn't have trouble with the children. They just loved her. It was just...
Things were different then.
They were different.
What do you remember?
You have to make learning fun or they're not going to, I mean, it can't be all fun, but you gotta. Well, I remember we didn't study too much. We was there to have a big time, whatever it was, so. But now, I went to school to Miss Thomas, too. I think I went to primer kindergarten in 1st grade. They had but now kindergarten was just summer. It was just a summer. It wasn't connected with the school year at that time. That's just something the kids got to do in the summer. And I went to kindergarten, and I had Miss Thomas and Miss Rosalie Gardner. And I didn't have Miss Sadie Bibb. I can't figure out who was my 3rd grade teacher. And Miss Mamie Myatt was the 4th grade. Hazel Deason was the 5th. She boarded with us. And I think she taught 6th too. And Bar Gardner he had a split, 7th and 8th class. And then we had Mr. Rippey and Mr. Looney, and they were our principals. And we had Catherine Nichols in high school. And we had the Dr. Bell's sister was one of our teachers in high school. And some of them was fresh out of college, and they didn't know much more than we did. And so one of them was trying to teach a class and tell something, I don't know if it was about child care or what, and she didn't know the word to use or anything, and so this girl in our class, she held up her hand, she said, I think I know what you're talking about. Said, you want me to tell them? So she explained what this teacher couldn't do.
When was the school established? Was it in the 20s?
I think it was 1923
That's-
was the first.
School at William James.
Yeah.
That's right,
Yeah.
isn't it? That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And it's that building stayed there from 23 when it was built until 72. I was in the last class that graduated.
Is the original
there.
building still there? A
None
little
of it's
part of it?
left.
None of it is.
None of it is. The addition they made in the 60s, which is the gym and what used to be the elementary school is there, but none of the other. They tore it down in 74. 74, I believe, 73, 74,
So
not long after.
That wing that they built, that was the grade schools, from, say, maybe fourth, fifth, and sixth. You remember that long building?
Yeah,
I don't know if you remember
I
it
do
or not.
remember it. Mhm.
They tore it down too,
It's all
eventually.
gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the last part of it, I think, too. I think that was the last part to go. What else you have down there, Betty?
Well, I know the PTA got busy and got us a gym, and it had 4 pot-bellied stoves, one in each corner of the gym when I went to school.
I vaguely remember. I remember it well, not necessarily
It
vaguely.
was down at the far end of like where they built those long
Yes,
classrooms.
Yeah.
Do y'all remember anybody of note coming through town, like anybody famous coming through town when you were young and that the town got stirred up about or anything, concerts or politicians or anything of that sort?
No, the only thing I remember is the Bisbee comedians that come. One of them was kin to Rod Brassfield, I think's the way it was, and they set up a tent and they had these plays there every summer, and the actors and everything, and they'd have maybe 3 different plays, and we thought we had to go see every one of them.
And you did.
I remember the Oak Ridge Boys came one time and sang in the.
Well, different ones used to come to the schools and
that's
play,
where they sang.
but I can't remember right offhand who they
of course,
were.
you know,
Eddie Arnold came.
Did he? And Anson Mount lived in White Bluff, you know, and his son.
Anson.
Oh man. I was in a play one time. We had plays at the end of school, and he was ahead of me in school, and I don't know the title of the play. I've got the playbook at home and who all was in it and everything, somewhere deep in my treasures. And I was Pocahontas in this play. Okay, he was John Smith. So they're going to kill him, and they said, okay, you've got to go in, run in, and put your arms around him to save him. And I said, I'll do everything but that, but I'm not going to do that. So I didn't. But he carried the banner, the paper, and after that he started calling me Poke. He'd throw the paper up on the porch. Here's your paper, Poke.
His mother was Miss Mary
Mount.
Mount.
She was a petty, wasn't she?
She was. I remember her. She was a small framed lady, and she would call the store, and I would have to take groceries to her. And she always had on a lot of rouge, and her hair was, white. She'd have it combed back, and really an interesting lady.
Did they live in the house? It was later a blue house up on that little hill going out of White Bluff.
No,
Is that where they lived?
They lived on Martin. If you go down Martin Street, it's on the left. The house is still there. It's a yellow house on Church Street.
Across from where Willowdean's
Willowdean's,
place used to be.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
where
that was
where I
their house.
remember them at the time.
And didn't that used to be a tourist home at one time?
I don't know. It could have been. I don't know. I don't
Seemed
remember
like
that.
it was, but I don't know who ran it.
Bed and breakfast
I guess back then it was.
or boarding.
Tell me about the
Yes.
tourist homes. We know there was Baker's Inn. Do you remember the Thompsons?
Yeah.
what was that? That was a nice place that they had. Who had that?
Well, I guess Lois and Basil ran during my time, but now I don't know who had it before then. But I know a lot of people came here, you know, that's where they would stay, because it was either there or Baker's Inn, the tourist.
Those were the two places in town.
That's the only two I remember. And they had rooms, you know, like sleeping rooms that people traveling would spend the night there.
Sort of like a bed and breakfast today.
I think that maybe where that got started, don't you? The bed and breakfast, because there wasn't too many places they could eat.
Did she prepare meals?
You know,
Probably
I guess maybe she probably did.
Lois was a fun lady,
Yeah,
Yeah.
she did. I can remember her.
laughing, and
Yeah.
she walked everywhere. What other people do you remember in town that were interesting in growing up that you remember?
Well, Mr. Bill Stiles, I remember he lived here, who was worked with the circus for years and years. He lived here. There was some interesting things about him.
Punch and Judy.
Yeah,
He was a magician, wasn't he? Didn't he claim to be a magician?
I believe so. I know he really was popular, really was a smart person, which hardly anybody knew he even lived here, I guess. You know,
His mom and dad lived here.
did they?
I remember. I don't remember
Yes,
them.
they were good people.
Yes.
His mom and dad, old. They were old when we were growing up.
Yes. I remember Gran and Granddad talking about them. Who else do you remember in town that stands out? Fine
Well,
people.
let's see.
What about Harley Dale?
Yes, he used to come to town in his horse and wagon.
What do you remember about Harley?
I remember he was big all over.
He would be considered almost a giant.
Yes, he
wouldn't
would.
How tall was he? Do you remember? 7
I would
feet.
say at
He
least
was pretty
8,
good size.
Maybe not 7. Maybe I would think he'd be close to 8 foot, wouldn't you? I don't know.
He had the
He
duck
stood above
everywhere he went.
everybody else around.
Do you remember him coming to town? I believe it was the Exxon station next to a mom and dad's store when I was little. And at that time, tourists would go through here, and he would stand. They had the racks they put the cars on then, and he would stand under that. The family would gather around that were traveling through, and they'd let that car down, and he would hold up the back of the car.
He was sort of
He was
an
an unusual
attraction.
fellow.
He
What
was
stores do you remember in town?
Well, there
What
was
was
a
here?
lot of them. There was about 7 grocery stores right up in White Bluff.
Yeah. What were they? Do you remember?
Yeah, there was Jackson's, Lampley's,
Kate Gardner.
Kate Gardner across the street, Myatt's, Beck's, Pap Beck's, Heath's, and then there was a new store, and then Brown store. Did I leave that?
Baker's Inn's, maybe they sold more beer than anything else.
Yeah.
Lowell Langford sold beer. I remember
Yeah.
sitting
Do you
in
remember
there
when that
with-
was a store? When there at
yeah.
the corner?
They had a jukebox in there too.
Which one?
The one where Gail lives now.
Oh, okay.
And that's where you turn off to go to Burns and White Bluff,
Right
where
in
she
the-
lives,
right in the
in that house.
court.
Down below, if you kept going toward Burns, there was Canebreak. What do you remember about Canebreak?
Well, Betty probably remembers more than me. I just remember
Well,
going by it.
It started out as a nice place, as a restaurant, you know, where you could go eat. And of course, they had a dance floor and a jukebox. And then it got to where it was mostly people drinking, and might have been a fight or two out there. So
Who had that? Who owned that? Do you remember?
Georgia Kane, she was from Waverly, and I don't know what Ken, I think he was a nephew, this Davy Lee, he was her nephew, and he was my age. He went to school some in White Bluff, and she had this Nash Rambler car. And David drove the car when he was in probably the 7th grade, and he'd come around them curves in White Bluff, and yeah, and the dust would fly. And anyway, one night, there's several girls spent the night away with a girl over in, the back side of Montgomery Bell Park. And he had somebody he had to take to the junior senior banquet, and that was you had a meal in the cafeteria, and then you might have went to the movie, and that was what you did back then, the junior senior prom. Well, it wasn't called a prom, it was called a banquet. And so he said, well, I'll come get y'all and we'll go to the movie. But he had to go take them somewhere, and he was going to take us home to where they spent the night and then go back and pick up his other load. Well, there was this black Sonny Hall. He was at the movie, and of course, he was looking for a ride to White Bluff. And he said, well, I've got a carload. Said, you'll have to ride in the trunk if we take you home. So here we are in this Nash Rambler, and I don't know how many girls had spent the night, and Davy driving. Well, of course, it was just the one road from, White Bluff to Dickson. So anyway, we were coming around Dead Man Curve, and he come around a little bit too fast, and he went into that curve, and it didn't hurt anybody, and it just kind of bent one of the fenders into the tire. But we was scared to death because we knew Sonny was in the trunk in that car. So we all jumped out of the car, and they threw up the lid on the trunk, and we all hollering, oh, Sonny, are you dead? Are you dead? How are you, Sonny? And all we could see was the white of his eye.
So Sonny was all right.
Sonny was okay. So anyway, we was afraid that it was going to tear up something in that car, and so we told him, said, well, we'll walk the back road from Burns to the back of Montgomery Bell Park. We sent him on home. But anyway,
That's a pretty good walk.
Yes, it is. It took us quite a while. We had to walk through a creek, and it seemed like it was winter time, and it was, I think, 5 girls is what it was. But that was a naughty thing that we did, because, see, we wasn't supposed to be going.
What time were you supposed to be home?
Well, see, we'd spent the night away from home.
Oh.
We wasn't at home.
But the
So your
one-
mom and daddy never knew about it.
one
Oh,
said-
yes, they did. They found out about it before I got home, I think. Because one time I had a fight with the Methodist preacher's daughter, and mother gone shopping to Nashville, and Thelma Jones and Walter always went on Thursday. They closed the rest. And she met mother on the street and told her I'd had a fight before she could get home. So news traveled back then fast.
Didn't need any cell phones.
Well, I
did
wanted to tell you, I lived across the street from Colonel James. you
Yeah,
know.
what do you remember, what do you remember about him?
I remember my aunt that worked for the telephone office. Of course, they knew all the gossip and everything that was going on, and cause they listened in when people called. But she said, well, they put him. He didn't take a bath. Of course, back then people had a wash pan or a tin tub or something like that, and they would put him on the train once a month, and they had these bathhouses in Nashville, and they'd put him on the train, send him to Nashville, and give him a bath. He'd get a bath once a month. But people, when he got to where he couldn't live by himself, different ones, I remember Daisy Sullivan's mother and daddy, they lived with him at one time, and then there was some people with the last name of Owens, they lived with him and looked after him, and he'd buy everything by the case of candy, case of pork and bean, case of sardine, and he'd eat out of the can.
Grandy told me about him ordering large amounts, and one time he ordered a carload of bologna. And it went bad and sat on the railroad track.
Oh
He
dear.
said about the same thing, and they finally had to haul it off and get rid of it.
A car.
Yeah,
A carload of bologna. He was somewhat eccentric.
So
in
is
that
his name
nature.
was, what, this is Colonel James?
Colonel James.
He's
Now
the one
what-
that donated the land for the school and
It's
everything.
named after William James
Okay.
was his name.
Now, was William James, was he a colonel in what? Was he an old man when you were little? I mean, does he go back as
Yeah.
far as like?
He was old. And I mean, he had already served his time in the army or whatever. Yeah.
So
Well-
when you were little, it would have been in the 30s, right? Late 30s,
Middle.
middle 30s. And if he
I
was
was
old,
born in 28.
so if he was old then, he would have been a Civil War colonel. Is that right?
I don't know. I'm sure it probably was, though.
I don't know where he came from.
I think Charlotte was.
Yeah, over at Charlotte.
He
right
went to school on, there was a school, I can't remember the name of it, we were talking about that the other day, but he finished school in the middle of Charlotte. There was some kind of scholastic place that he went there.
Well, how did he know Miss Ann?
Were they kind of related?
Yes, that was
But
his
now
niece.
he adopted Ann so she could inherit his property because I guess, was
had a
he ever
lot.
married?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I wonder if he was deeded land for his
Yes,
service.
that's where a lot of the land that he got came from. I can't remember how many acres. He has a nephew that still lives here and lived where his mom, Miss Ann, lived.
Of course, the
Still-
first house was on, is that Main Street? No, Commerce
Commerce.
Street.
Yeah, that's
The
where
fir-
the
you
store
remember the
was.
first house? You remember
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
first white house? It was a beautiful home. I remember R.E. wanted them to save it, and it had the beautiful
All
Stained
that
glass.
Yeah,
around and
Had
gingerbread
blue
work.
and red in it, and then most people today don't realize the red glass in a house back during the 1800s and the early 1900s. The more red that was in the stained glass windows, the more wealth you had, because it took gold to make it, pure gold, and it still takes pure gold to make the red. So when you see a lot of red in the stained glass, that signified wealth. And he was that house. I remember going down to your mom and dad's store, and I remember the orange, the blue, the yellow, and the red stained glass in that house around the
I know
windows.
it was a very pretty home.
Yeah. Andrew is is the nephew,
Mhm,
Miss
and
Ann's son.
played
that's
the
left.
trumpet and kept everybody awake at
And
night.
he
I
was good
think.
friends with your brother
He
Jimmy.
was. He was. Uh-huh.
And they got into all kinds of things
Oh,
growing
yeah.
up.
Well, I didn't know it until, I hope I don't have to sneeze. But he told me, Andrew did 2 or 3 years ago, that they got on a train and when they were 16 and rode to New Orleans.
They did.
And I never, my mother never mentioned it. And I can't imagine what my mother was thinking.
They didn't know it.
Where did she?
They slipped off.
Well, how?
Andrew told me about them
Yeah.
slipping off, and they wanted to do the riverboat. And both of them were great buddies and got into all kinds of
Yeah.
mischief. But they had a large time. But that was one of the many things that they got into. And they were both, and certainly Jimmy was into Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn.
Oh, yes.
And so I think they got a lot of their ideas from that. Tell us a little bit about Jimmy, Adelaide. He was certainly a educator, and taught school, but he was an extraordinary writer and person. Tell us a little bit about him.
Right, he was. Everybody loved him. He was a teacher, and the children that went to school under him loved him because they did a lot of nature walks. They learned a lot of things that children don't learn today.
Wasn't in the books.
Wasn't in the books. I remember one of his students told me that he played cultured music. That children just don't hear today and didn't hear then, but he played cultured music for the children, and like I said, took them on a lot of nature walks and taught them a lot of things. Well, I'm trying to think. I know he was good to a lot of the children. A lot of the children didn't have a lot of things, and no one would ever know. But he bought them clothes, and probably I know he's even paid light bills for some of the families, and they would keep clothes around because some of the children would come to school with dirty clothes and just ragged clothes. And I know he was good to us as a brother. He loved to do good things for people. He never tried to be a person, high and mighty type person. He came down to people's level.
This is
And
Jimmy.
Jimmy Brown was my brother. He was my oldest brother. He
Had a newspaper. Started,
newspaper, right.
Yeah, in the old, I remember back in 72. I think they established maybe 71, but in certainly 72. He had the print shop or whatever in your mom and dad's old store.
Mm-hmm.
After it closed, he used it and had the newspaper, because I remember going in there several times to see him.
Was it he and Lawrence Brown?
Maybe so.
And the other banker that ran the restaurant.
Harold.
Harold
Sutton.
Sutton.
Yeah, I couldn't remember who all was involved with it, but I remember being down there frequently during that time. I would stop to see him because he was always, every child I ever knew, including myself growing up, really, he was a role model for all of us. He was so talented, and he was so well versed and so well read in everything. He was probably one of the best literary people around. He could just tell you all kinds of wonderful things, and things that if you did not have him and you went over the same material, you wouldn't remember. I remember the Spoon River Anthology. Well, you know, in the 6th grade. I mean, who would remember? And I have a book that he later on gave me of the Spoon River Anthology. He was just a great fella. Danny, what did he end up doing?
He worked in Oregon. One of the places was Corvallis. He loved the outdoors, and he went out and worked as a firefighter, and in the a fire tower for maybe it was the first year after he graduated from high school. He went to David Lipscomb College and graduated there. Then he went on to Oregon. I think he went 2 years in Oregon, and then he got his forestry degree at Duke University in Raleigh, North Carolina, and he worked in the forestry until he retired. I would say 30 years. Do you remember how many years he said the other day? But
He said he'd been away 40 years from
40,
White Bluff,
okay.
so.
well, it would be close to about 35 probably, because once he retired, I think he maybe spent some time in Atlanta, Georgia. I believe around 25 years he lived in Atlanta, Georgia.
Wow.
And but he moved around a lot with the forestry division. And one thing I remember, I just was going to tell this story about my brother Jimmy, was very intelligent. I always longed to have just a tiny bit of his intelligence. But I remember that we found out later that he stayed on the dean's list most of the time at David Lipscomb, but never told even my parents. So
It was not important to him.
no, it wasn't.
No. There was Jimmy and Danny.
Mm-hmm.
Your
Right.
mother, tell me a little bit about Miss Hester.
Well, my mother, talking about the school, of course, when she was little, her dad and mom moved around a lot. They're originally from Indiana. And her dad liked to move a lot. And he actually, before he married my grandmother, he homesteaded in North Dakota.
Wow.
And had some land for 7 years in North Dakota. And my grandmother was a teacher in Oklahoma, and they met out there in Oklahoma, but both were from Indiana, so they married in Oklahoma. And then, of course, my mother was one of a twin. She had a twin sister, and they moved around a lot. Her mother died when she was, I think, around 8, maybe, and lived with her aunts and her dad. And then somehow she met my dad. Betty might remember how she met him, but she did go to school at the same school we went to up to through the 11th grade.
Really?
And then
She had brothers and sisters?
she had, of course, a twin sister, and then she had
Esther was her name, yes.
My mother's name was Hester, her sister was Esther. And she had another brother, Lawson, and another one, Millard, who was superintendent of the park for several years, until he died, I guess. He died very early at 52. But I guessed my mother must have, and my dad married around 1934, possibly. And she worked with my dad in the store, and loved roses, grew roses, and was a supreme mother and cook to a lost her mother so early in life. She was remarkable, I think. And
Easygoing.
mm-hmm.
They're a lot like your mom. I remember she was always very patient with me. My mom would take me out there, and I always liked to go. She would let me go to the barn and take me to the lake, and then Jimmy would be there. Oh, it's great fun going out there. And she had a beautiful rose garden.
Yes,
She
loved
could
her
do
roses.
anything she wanted to.
Yeah, such a kind
Oh,
person.
she was a seamstress.
Yes, she
was
did
a
beautiful work.
Yes, a
And
good
she
cook,
worked in the
a good
store.
gardener. She would do that. I remember. This probably doesn't means nothing, but I can remember working in the store. Her working in the store all day, and there was, I think, once a month she'd clean her floors. She'd go home probably 8 or 9 o'clock at night and mop and wax her kitchen floor. That's what she had planned to do.
That's
She
what she
didn't have
did.
time.
No, there was no
They
time.
lived at the store.
Yeah.
First
they
color
did.
TV we ever had, I bought for my mom and dad from them. I remember being in the 6th grade, and my mother had a chair she wasn't necessarily happy with. And I worked at my mom and dad's store, and I went down, they paid me, of course, and the first thing I ever bought of the amount to anything was a chair out of your mom and dad's store. It was a tall wingback, and that would have been in the 60s. And your mom let me pay $10 a month. It was $120, including the tax and the interest. So I started in November of one year, and the next November,
It was
the week
painful.
before, I paid that chair off, and they delivered it.
Oh, you didn't
Yeah.
even have the chair.
Didn't even have
No.
I paid for it, and
Oh.
then when I got it paid for, I figured it out. And I remember the upstairs at your mom and dad's, really at the store, was just full of furniture. They had everything. It's a
They
fun
did, and
place.
appliances too. They sold.
Yeah, everything, dishes, all kind of things. Tell me about what you remember about your mom, Daddy.
She liked to have fun, and she loved music. She liked to sing. She liked to cook. She liked to go places. You name it. She wanted to do it. Try it
laughed
all.
So much, all the time. I remember growing up, she had a contagious laugh that I can hear her now.
On my dad's side, it was W.T. Daniel was his mother's father, which would be my great grandfather, right?
Right.
And the mother's name was Lily Dodson Daniel on my dad's side. On my mom's side, it was Martin Luther Graham. I think her name was Etta Esther, or it was Etta, I know, McFadden Graham. And let's see, on my mother's dad's side, his name was George. No, wait a minute, I'm wrong. On my dad's side, his grandfather was George Washington Brown. The grandmother's name was Fanny Woodard Brown. Okay, on my mom's side, I've told you, it was Martin Luther and Etta. And then it was, let's see, the grandfather's name was Addison what Brown. And her name was Martha Bridges Brown. So that's as far back as I can go as the great-grandparents.
Okay, and then there's you, and did you have brothers and sisters?
Have one sister, Anita Spann.
Okay. And then what about children?
Have two girls, Vicki Wilson and Melanie Bergstead.
Now, which, it was your parents or was it your grandparents that started the store? Back
Yeah,
then?
it was both of our
Okay,
Because we're
grandparents.
first cousins.
right, okay,
So our dads were brothers.
okay. Well, tell me then, going back to your grandparents.
Okay, I don't remember my great-grandmother's name. I know her last name was Bright. But my grandmother's name on my mother's side was Althea Adelaide Bright Whittinghill. My grandfather was William D. Whittinghill, which they were married, and I always said my poor grandmother had a long name to spell when it was Adelaide Whittinghill.
That's right.
It was long. And then my father's side was the same with Bettye. My grandfather was J.W. Brown, James Wed Brown, and my grandmother was Bernice. I don't know her
I
middle
don't
name.
think she ever had another name, as far as I know. I've never heard it.
If it was called Bernice or Bernice.
It's always, I think, been Bernice, and I think they might have changed it to Bernice. Now, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, anyway, she was Bernice Daniel, and then my mother and father were Hester and Garner. My mother was Hester Whittinghill, and my dad was Garner Brown, and then they had me, and they had Jimmy. He was James Garner Brown, and then my brother was Howard Daniel Brown, and then I was named after my grandmother, Althea Adelaide Brown. So, and then I married Jerry Butler. So we have 3 children. We have Rhett and Scarlett Butler, and then we adopted our 3rd child when she was 3, Robin, and Scarlett has 6 children. Robin has 6 children. Rhett has 5 children. So that makes 17 grandchildren and almost 8 great-grandchildren. So that's a lot.
They got busy, that's good.
So you got your own party going
I do.
anytime you can get them together.
Anytime. That's right.
What else do you have in there?
Oh, me. Let's see. Well, I think the James building burned in 1946, January the 7th.
Adelaide, we were talking about that the other day, and I remember the Sunday afternoon that the hardware store, the original one, and the grocery store caught fire. That was in 1978. It's when the January in 1978.
Well, I remembered Helen would have been your sister-in-law, right?
Right.
Helen Myatt telling me at their store that it burned, I think, the same day that when the old Myatt, the old town burned. Is
Yes. Do you remember that, either one of you, when the town burned? You do?
And
Tell
that
me
was what
about
year?
that.
Let's
You
see,
say
I had that here.
46?
No, it was, well, where did I see that? Boy, this is
I thought Helen said it was 33 years to the day, but it would have been 32.
I know I was still in high school, and we had moved out to where Aunt Ada lives now, and we were trying to get Daddy to call him, tell him to come on home and have supper. And of course, Blanche and Beulah was on the switchboard, and she said, we was wanting her to ring. She said, oh God, I can't ring 'cause the town is on fire. Well, it was already dusky dark, and of course, we wanted to go. And so we got Mr. Barfield to drive us uptown, and Mama Bernice was sick, and of course, the fire kept coming toward their house, and they got her in the car and got her some of her clothes and took them out to where Aunt Eva lives now, so she, wouldn't be involved in all of that. But they had the bucket brigade, I can't say.
Brigade.
Yeah, but
Brigade.
anyway, that's what they had, and was trying to stop the fire, but it was going across the street from one building to the next.
Must have been very windy or something that day. Was Myatt's the same place that it?
Yes,
Yeah,
It was the
right on the
exact same
corner.
place.
same place.
But anyway, it wiped the whole town out.
It burned down to how far down, like compared to today, where would it have burned?
Below where, well, it got the
Randy's
house
store.
on the corner, both corners, but,
There was a dress shop, did they say burned?
yeah, in the
Agnes
James
Jordan.
building.
Agnes Jordan had the
Yeah,
dress
and there was a
shop there.
barber shop and a doctor's office and a drugstore and a beauty shop and I don't know what all different, and they had apartments upstairs.
Was the James building the same, on the same side as Myatt's store? Was it?
Or in the Methodist church, from the
Yeah.
Methodist, where the Methodist church is now, down to where the old store, my dad's store is.
Oh, it burned.
Burned all of that
Oh,
section,
okay.
yeah.
Oh, we had this Indian chief, he came to town every Friday, and it was in there where Buford Wharf lives, used to be a feed store, and they called it the Feed House Movie, and he played music, and they had a movie there every Friday or Saturday night. That was our theater in White Bluff.
This was about what year, you think?
It was in the late 30s, I'd say. Middle to late 30s.
And it wasn't a theater, right? It was just a.
They said, well, they never would let us go. They said this rough crowd goes there, and they kind of get into a fight every once in a while. And I've been told that they just had shelves like where you sit, on the wall, that they wasn't really, but that was somewhere to go.
Yeah,
They played this music that everybody liked, but he lived in McEwen, this Chief Eagle Feather.
it would come to White Bluff.
Well, now what about the Wren man? He
The what?
Wren.
Howard Joe.
Now he had a movie theater, didn't he?
Yeah,
in
he
White
took
Bluff.
over when Chief Eagle Feather retired, or whatever he quit. But yeah,
Do you remember a carnival coming to town?
oh yeah,
It was where the old bank and post office used to be.
yeah. Everything's
Yeah.
set up. This tent show set up in that lot and everything.
Yeah,
But a circus came one time and it set up across the railroad tracks over there. And I know they had a bear with them. And they wanted somebody to sit on the bear, to ride the bear, or ride around. And Bessie Griffin got on the bear and rode around on it.
Oh, I wish we had pictures of that. Wow. It was different then. What else you have down there?
Oh, well, Coonrod Hatley, he picked
And
up
Lucy.
what?
His wife was named Lucy.
Yes, and he used to aggravate them. But he'd come by the telephone office and it'd be snowing or just bitter cold, and he'd knock on the door and sing "In the Good Old Summertime" to them that was working the switchboard. And then Mr. Fred Butler did the same. Well, he didn't knock on the door and sing to them, but he picked up the mail, and they had one train that didn't stop, and it was, I think, number 5, and it went through about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and they put the mail in a sack, and there was a pole outside on the railroad track, and the train would come by, and this guy would reach out with some kind of fork or stick and get the sack of mail and pull it in the train. And sometimes they didn't catch it, and it would get under the train and chew the mail up.
So White Bluff is a railroad, or was started out as a railroad town, right? I mean, that's pretty much.
Well, that kind of, yeah.
It helped.
Yeah.
It helped.
Well, I mean, you're saying, talking about knowing when the trains came through. I mean, is that something that was kind of a thing? You sort of knew the train schedule and when you could.
Yeah, they had 3 passenger trains, but this number 5 didn't stop. Now, my granddaddy worked for the railroad, and he would ride in at night and work, and then he'd ride back home the next morning on the train, and those 2 stopped. Number 4 was the one that was in the morning, and number 3 went in at night.
And one thing about the store, it was right near the railroad
Yes,
track.
it was.
And the house that y'all lived in was right beside of the store, and you could tell them about the hobos that came by. And
Yeah, the hobos used to come by, and Mother would fix them something to eat, and they'd sit out there on the steps and eat whatever she fixed for them. But we used to have lots of hobos, and we called them tramps, back then when they rode the trains. And there was Miss Alice Gillum's brother-in-law he worked for the railroad, and he did something. He was in the caboose, and his caboose number was 66. And we knew when 66 went in on the side, they let us get in the caboose and climb up in there, and they let us get in the engine, open the firebox, ring the bell, blow the whistle. Well, that was our entertainment. The depot was it was a busy place because people rode the train, and I know Mr. Bob Nelson, he had something to do with, I don't know if it was the ties or what, that the people, they loaded them onto the trains, and he met about every train that come to town, passenger train. And if anybody needed to ride home, well, he took them.
Who all do you remember back then working at the railroad? Didn't Weldon McDonald?
I think he was the telegraph man.
Yeah.
He did the telegraph.
Yeah.
wasn't he a relative of yours, McDonald? Or
No, I tell you who he was related to was Miss Elsie Brown. I think he married her sister.
okay.
That's right. That's right. They were Aunt Elsie and Aunt Blanche there were 3 brothers and 3 sisters that married, and they were some of out of that
Well, what
offsprings
was
of the
their
marriage.
last
Double
name?
first cousins.
Double first cousins, yes, and that's why half the people in town are kin.
Probably
Yeah.
That's right.
because they didn't have a lot of men to
There
meet.
were,
They just,
there were 3 sets of double first cousins, and in each family there was 10 to 12 children. So, which that made between 33 and 40 double first cousins, which is on the board back here now. which
So we're
everyone
all
can
kin, whether we want
That's
to be
right.
or not. all right.
right. That's what they say, be careful who you talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You may be talking about somebody's cousin.
Well, you are.
What else do you have down there?
Well, Uncle Garner was going to take me on an airplane ride. They landed in a field back across from the railroad over there. I don't know how they found a field big enough to land. Of course, it probably wasn't a huge plane back then. And I was all built up. We were going to go over there. The plane was coming, and so he run into Coonrod, and you know, they wanted to play a joke on him. So instead of taking me on the plane ride, he takes Coonrod, and they go up, and I guess he had him to do everything the plane could do, and Coonrod was scared to death. I don't think he ever got over that plane ride.
Of course, my dad wasn't the pilot.
No.
Okay.
Well,
So you
he
didn't-
might have been. I don't know.
He probably would have tried it anyway.
Yeah, so that was one thing. And then up there where the news store was, it was I think a doctor's office and a drugstore, and the last names were Morgan. And I don't know when he died, but his wife lived there several years, and you never saw her out on the street anywhere, and she wore these long black dresses and bonnets, and she took care, I don't know if you remember those big white roses that grew on the fence all the way. She was the kids were kind of afraid of her because of the way she dressed and looked, but she was fine. So that was right up in White Bluff. So I know that for sure happened. And well, I know Halloween, we didn't have any treats. You just did a trick. You pushed somebody's outhouse over, you soaked their windows, you put a dead cow or horse or something up in front of the bank or the,
Do you remember that?
yeah.
I
Or
do too.
Blanche, she come out
I
with
do
her
too.
pistol, and she had an outhouse, and it was a 3-seater. And the kids knew what was going to happen, and she knew they'd turn it over every year. And she had that gun, and she'd raise pistol. She'd raise that window in her kitchen, and she'd fire. And I said, please don't do that. I said, those kids, I said, you're going to kill somebody, and it's going to be somebody you know, and you won't ever get over it. I said, please don't shoot. But she called us once. We were in Dickson at Ari's mother and daddy's and trick-or-treating with the kids, and called us to come. Well, she come out there with an old house coat on and her hair rolled up and that silver pistol waving it around in the yard. I wouldn't let the kids get out. I said, no. She didn't know how to load it. She knew how to shoot it, but she didn't know. She wanted him to reload the pistol for her. I said, can't you get some blanks and put in that thing so she'll think she's shooting? But yeah, she is going to, kill him.
She wired it. Didn't she wire it one time with electricity?
Well, she could have. I don't know. She done a little bit of everything. So
Do you remember the Halloween years and years ago when there was a mule and they killed it, took it up in front, right in the bank door.
mm-hmm.
You remember that?
Yeah.
And they sliced it open. Yeah, I remember walking to school. I was probably in the first or second grade, and I'm like, wow. And there was no back entrance to the bank. There was one door. That was the only way in. They didn't have a back door at the bank.
So if anybody need to go to the bank,
It's too bad. Sure was, but I remember that.
But no, we didn't. Nobody had any treats. It was all tricks. You just did a trick.
nobody had any candy or
No,
apples
they
or-
had a carnival at the school.
It was fun.
Miss Alice Gillum would always make popcorn balls.
The kids couldn't wait till she made those popcorn balls. Adelaide's wedding is the only wedding I ever cried at.
Is it? I don't remember going to the wedding. I don't remember going, but I remember.
Oh, me, what is she doing? See, because she was like a little sister to us, because we played with, we'd get her every Sunday and she'd go home with us, and we played with her and dressed her up and done her hair and done it,
Oh, good grief.
She's
Yeah.
even got a picture of me on Ari's shoulder. Can you believe I was ever that small?
It's hard to think about, isn't
It
it?
is.
Good grief.
Oh, well, it was fun, and we entertained ourselves, and we were satisfied. And
Well,
I think
that was-
that's the secret of life, is just being content with whatever you've got and wherever you are.